Welcome to Signals and Stories, 10 Years with the Vertex Project, a limited series exploring how cyber threat intelligence has evolved over the past decade. In each episode, we break down how analysts actually investigate, covering the data and the decisions that shape real-world intelligence. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to our limited series. We're doing 10 episodes to represent 10 years of the Vertex Project opening its doors. I'm Callie Fensel, and today I'm sitting down again with our analysts from the Vertex Project, Ryan Hallback, aka Rain, Jennifer Coldy, aka The Silence, and Mary Beth Lee, aka Savage. And today we're talking about how to avoid common analyst pitfalls, or at least our advice on avoiding pitfalls. If you have other advice, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. So thank you, ladies, for joining me again. We're all wearing black or some variation of that. So I think we're all in the same mindset, which is great. So I guess just to jump into things, is there a quote unquote classic analyst mistake you think almost everybody makes early in their CTI career?
I would think that it's probably confirmation bias.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no data to back that. So but I think it's really easy to think that you know what's going on, and then kind of, instead of being really critical about what you're seeing, to kind of see everything then through that lens, and just kind of cripple your analysis that way.
I think there's sometimes a pressure to link what you're seeing to something that's already been seen. So not necessarily full-on attribution, but okay, there's this new activity and there's a desire and a little bit of pressure, I think, to link that with a group that you've seen before, rather than letting it simply stand on its own and turn into something or not down the road. That desire to continually kind of link stuff up, I think, is also a pitfall that people fall into.
Yeah, I know when I first started, it was two things that commonly got me and that I was always surprised by, but at some point I got out of it, which was assuming that everyone already had it figured out. When I first started in the field, you kind of go to these organizations, started in the government, and you think, oh, they're going to have the best tech, the brightest people, these elegant solutions. And then you get in there and it's we're using this tool. We have to run this little script that's duct taped together to figure this out. We don't have a more elegant solution. And so I think one pitfall, I guess mistake, is just assuming that everyone has the answer and not coming into an environment ready to contribute and valuing your own, insight, I guess, if you will. And another mistake that I made was not feeling comfortable challenging people, because you come into spaces where you're around a lot of bright people and you may see something that's not right, or you don't think it's right, but you don't speak up. And I think it's a classic mistake not to speak up, or not to feel comfortable when other people speak up against you as well. It's kind of like this little SME trap. You think they're the SME, so you don't say anything. So those were two mistakes I know that I made early on, for sure.
Do you think, Rain, just to follow up on that question or on that answer, what do you think about a virtual work environment versus an in-person work environment on challenging people? Does it make it easier to have that courage to challenge somebody when you're working from home versus whether you're seeing them in the office?
I think it's more of a cultural thing where if it's embedded in the culture, whether it's remote or in person, you'll feel it. I know here at Vertex, and at, some of my previous places, you didn't have a choice, right? So it was ingrained, it was understood, it was respected, it was encouraged. So I think it's more about the culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to kind of view it. And I agree that I think it is culture. Because on one hand, I could see making the argument that if you're working remotely, or one of you is working remotely, maybe it's a little bit easier because that person physically isn't there. So it's a little bit of like on one hand, you could argue like it feels less confrontational. But on the other hand, maybe you don't know them as well. They're not as human to you as like somebody that you see every day, or like maybe you have some kind of like rapport with that you otherwise wouldn't have. Um, but I think you're right that it is cultural. It is like, if this is expected, if this is normalized, if this is like, even if it's just like, I don't necessarily see the case that you've built out, or if there's a way that they could build it out more clearly so that you can follow. Not necessarily like, I don't think that you're correct. Um, I think it's helpful to be able to have like an environment where you can have those conversations, and it ultimately helps you build a case that kind of like spans any audience who would be able to interpret it and come to the same conclusion.
I think Rain made a really good point, right? Like we think sometimes about mistakes in terms of technical mistakes, but I think that there are environmental mistakes or cultural mistakes, or how am I going to go about my analyst job mistakes. And we've touched on this in some of the previous episodes, of that importance of not only challenging each other, but challenging yourself, like really thinking through your argument. Am I comfortable with the analytical decisions I've made, the logic that I've made, and that ability to have constructive conversations with your peers, even when you disagree, to come to the best analysis. And it does take some courage to do that, because there's pressure in every field. And it can feel like, if in the course of one of those discussions, it turns out that my theory or my analysis was incorrect, once I hash it out with Ryan and Mary Beth, that can feel like a failure, and it shouldn't. And I think that is one of the big mindsets that analysts have to get over, is that we're all working with that incomplete data. We're all trying to produce the best analysis and the best intelligence that we can. And part of that is having those discussions, and sometimes being correct, and sometimes acknowledging that maybe you didn't take something into consideration, and this time around you weren't correct, but that's fine.
Would you say that a pitfall from 10 years ago would be different than one today? Or would you say it's very similar to like especially confirmation bias? Maybe that's not changing throughout the decade, but is there anything else that you'd say has changed in terms of what would be considered a pitfall?
I mean, I brought up confirmation bias because I think that, to me, again, with no backing data, um, I feel like confirmation bias. I feel like I'm also just revealing a lot about myself. Like, that's my biggest pitfall. But I feel like that comes to mind because I think that's so much of how the brain works, as the brain like tries to do all these shortcuts to help you recognize patterns. Like, if you've ever read about, I think it's something where if you spell out a word, but you keep the first letter and the last letter the same, but then you can scramble the middle ones, and like people can generally still read it because they're seeing what they expect to see. And I feel like that's basically the brain using confirmation bias to like, and like pattern recognition to help you make sense of information. And in some cases that can work. Like, great, I can read that like that sentence of, partially scrambled words. But when you're looking at something and you have to be really critical because it might not be what you expect, or someone's trying to trick you or things like that, confirmation, like that's not like a helpful thing that your brain is doing. And just like being aware of that and then having to actively like fight against that and be a lot more critical is what comes into play. I think with pitfalls today versus like 10 years ago, I think that, I'm not sure if this is what you were thinking, but what comes to mind to me is that it would be like the biggest difference I think I would see is not necessarily like the types of biases or things that might come into play, but more of I would think that for almost everybody, like the amount and kind of type of data that we're working with has probably changed so much because technology has changed. So I would think that, like that would be kind of where things get more complicated, rather than like, a certain type of bias is more prevalent or something like that. I don't know if that was what you were getting at, though, or what you were thinking of.
Is Callie trying to lead us to answers? She
No.
has specific answers in mind.
Never.
Callie's like, what the heck? That's not where I was going.
I think
You people.
I promise you, I don't have like preconceived notions coming into this. I'm like, she can answer the question the way I want it.
you could,
Like, there goes my
you could-
segue.
No, I think in some ways the mistakes are the same, but the details are different. And I think two things that I found challenging as an early analyst and that I still find challenging now are a lot of the analysis work that we do relates to technology, right? It's still cyber threat intelligence, even though we're trying to convince people that we need to expand that scope. But if we're working with technologies in order to cluster activity, in order to understand if something is normal behavior or, potentially an anomaly that we need to investigate, we need to understand how those technologies work. And technology is a huge field and it changes constantly, and none of us know everything. So attempting to make assessments based on technologies that we don't fully understand can lead us down the wrong path. And also kind of related to that, if we don't understand how the technologies work, we don't necessarily see when attackers are abusing those technologies or how they're leveraging them to further their activity. And I think that's kind of remained a constant because technology keeps evolving. It's just the specifics of the technology and the specifics of what the actors are doing have changed. So to give like a really dumb, simple example, right? 15 years ago, passive DNS was the bomb, right? Like we looked at all of that passive DNS activity. And if we had a known bad domain, any IP address that domain resolved to in the early days potentially got flagged as attacker infrastructure. And then we figured out that attackers will park IPs and they'll point domains at IPs that they're not actually using, or they'll use the IP address to calculate the actual C2 activity. So the need to understand DNS and how DNS records work and how passive DNS works was important to making those assessments, but also understanding how the attackers were using or misusing or abusing that technology so we could track their activity. Passive DNS is not as big a thing anymore, but you extrapolate that to some of the technologies that are relevant now, whether it's multi-factor authentication or cloud-based services, we still have the same challenges of understanding the technology and understanding how the attackers are using it.
Yeah, I think that they both raise some good points. I think if I had to think of like a different issue or a challenge or pitfall, and B brought up the point about she mentioned like the amount of data that we have now. And we just did this exercise creating the PivotCon workshop where we talked about like the state of reporting, and we were knee deep in looking at reporting, and it's so much data out there. And we identified, I think, a lot of pitfalls, but one of the things I think we're seeing, I don't know if this is an industry thing, an analyst thing, vendors, but it seems like when we get this data, we're starting to prioritize like the story and the narrative, like sensationalizing things over actually having intelligence value. And I think we see that a lot. Internally, we bicker about just the amount of, I guess, regurgitation that's out there. Like you see one IOC and you see it again, you see it again, you see it again. And I'm like, why am I getting the same story from 10 different feeds? And I think that's kind of like a pitfall of us in the industry, right? Where it's kind of like this echo chamber is what we refer to it as, right? This echo chamber intelligence where you have one person that will report on some activity and then several vendors will pick it up. And then in the next thing you know, all of these folks are talking about it on Twitter. And you kind of think that what's being reported on is a thing. You're assuming that what they've reported on has been, corroborated and backed, when in actuality, it's not as prevalent and widespread as you think at all. It's just that we have this echo chamber issue. So I think there's always this constant gut check to say, okay, let's not focus on writing a story. Let's not focus on like branding. Let's get back to why we're here, which is to write something that people can benefit from and that's valuable. And I think that's a pitfall that we're seeing us struggle with as analysts. I think companies maybe need to scale back and kind of look at themselves in the mirror because it's just creating this issue of distorting potentially what's happening. You talk about confirmation bias, it's like, it's no wonder because you think there is something and you're seeing the same thing over and over again. And you're definitely going to start to see AP28, over all the things, but it's not your fault. It's just kind of being kind of thrown in your face.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things that kind of comes to mind with me is just like this reporting challenge and pitfall that we have internally.
I was curious, have any of you, like without, giving away like doxing any company or any one person, like, have you ever seen like a team become too attached to an early hypothesis, and like what happened, when they went down that rabbit hole when maybe they shouldn't?
So there's a funny story that I was not actually in the room for, but that I was told by a respected colleague, that people can get so invested in their attribution analysis, who's responsible for activity. And there was a meeting where there were two groups that disagreed who was responsible for a particular set of activity. And it nearly came to like fistfights. Like people were that upset and that invested in their own analysis that they were angry and felt super threatened when they were being challenged. So it can definitely happen. And I think that goes back to what we were describing earlier, is you have to be willing to challenge your own assumptions, to challenge other people's assumptions, not in a belligerent way or, just for the sake of doing it. But we're always working with incomplete data. We always have to reassess that and at least be willing to listen, even if we're not convinced. I feel like we can extrapolate that to a lot of different issues today, but it's important in intelligence analysis too.
Yeah,
So
I can't think of. Oh, sorry. Go
Oh,
ahead, Cal.
I was just gonna say, so like being an analyst, you also need to be like trained up in like Krav Maga,
And
karate, like to be ready to throw hands at like.
That's why we work
That's an
remotely,
advantage
Callie.
of disagreeing. Yeah, disagreeing in a remote work environment is that Savage can't actually punch me.
Can't throw
I have
hands.
to a long
No.
time to think about it while I drive across the country.
And her handle is.
I'll be ready for you.
Her handle is savage. So.
You gotta like beware of that. But
I was
I'm
going to share. I don't recall like working with anyone personally and having a misattribution mistake made, but we did internally, like when we first started with Vertex, we were working on this DARPA project and we were creating this data set that we wanted to look realistic. We were testing out some products, some I guess, methodologies that we were implementing. So we created a malware sample and we embedded a domain that was attributed to a known threat group. And we uploaded it to VirusTotal. But we did that because our goal was to download it, do some analysis or whatever. Literally a couple days later, this company writes a story about this malware sample and they attribute it to this threat group. And we were like, why would you do that? Right? We never thought that this would happen. And it happened, but subsequently, maybe about a week later, someone, or actually closer than that, was a couple days later, another researcher was like, whoa, this doesn't make sense. Sure, this, C2 domain was embedded in this malware sample, but this does not align with their TTPs at all. We've never seen them use this malware family. Look at where it was uploaded from. It doesn't do this. What does it drop, et cetera? It just doesn't make sense. And I think that's an example of us, like Jen said earlier, being so eager to connect the dots, right? Where just because you see an overlap doesn't mean that it's analytically valuable, right? Or has a true relationship like you may think. So I think that's an example of an analyst knowing that this domain was attributed to this group previously, but they didn't scrutinize their thought or think about other ways or other reasons why this could be. So that's something that we did witness and we laughed about kind of, but we were also saddened about, like, how could you do this?
But it's
we tried to make it. Go ahead, MB.
I was going to say that it was also like, it was kind of surprising, but I think it also, like, we were in a position where we could, like, not only was it something that we had created, but like we weren't held to the same pressures that I think the company that ended up doing that had, where, like, you're pressed to produce, you're pressed to like be the first one to report, to like, this was something that they found and they thought they had like the hot new, like, discovery. And I think those are also things that contributed to, maybe being a little bit more hasty than they would have been otherwise.
Yeah, if I recall that they didn't publish a blog, it was like putting it out on Twitter, right? I have to tweet these new IOCs that I saw that are linked to this threat group. And we had tried to be, like, we did upload a sample to VirusTotal to to make our scenario realistic that we were working on. But we had tried to be really obvious, right? Like the malware that we embedded the C2 into was Mimikatz, right? Mimikatz doesn't have a C2, so you'd think that would have been a tip-off, but apparently it wasn't. So,
Are there warning signs that an analyst is, starting to, build a case rather than test a hypothesis that people should, as they're training to be analysts, look out for?
I think in like for me personally, just to bring back my bird, if I find that I'm in the situation where I like come across something and I like collect it like a bird would collect like shiny objects and I'm like, this would go perfectly right here and like the rest of my, like cherished, case that I'm putting together or story, as opposed to kind of like, scrutinizing it on its own. Um, if my immediate thought is like, oh, this fits in so well, then it's like, oh, you're down the wrong path, or like you have to calm down and take a big step back. And um so that's my, if I feel like things are like fitting really well together and I'm like kind of like acquiring evidence instead of like considering each thing from like a very cold kind of perspective. That's, I feel like that's my warning sign.
It's too perfect.
Right.
Everything's going too well.
yeah, yeah, that never happens in analysis. So, I
I
think,
don't feel slightly
again,
heartbroken.
no, but I think, to points that folks have already made, right? Like Ryan talked about, you're writing the story and you're not looking at the analysis. And that's, in my mind, a little bit similar to what I mentioned earlier about like you're trying to link it up. You're trying to force it to tie in with something that you've already seen. And I think that pressure in whatever form to have it turn out a neat little package, a perfect little package, is definitely a warning sign. And I think the challenge is that because a lot of intelligence is still tied in with commercial companies and with marketing and with, like Ryan mentioned, the hype cycle, right? Everybody's writing about the latest hot thread activity. All of those pressures can weigh on analysts in terms of, what we're expected to produce or what gets recognized, right? Just strictly from a job performance or promotion activity, right? Like if you're writing all the hot blogs on all the hot new stuff, that in some ways looks better for your career than if you're sitting down in the corner, like doing your serious analysis. So I think it's really important that we fight those pressures.
Hmm.
The other thing that I would just point out is at the end of the day, like, in cyber threat intelligence, like so much of what we're working with at the forefront is technology, but behind that is people. And a lot of the times it's people who are trying to obscure what they're doing or trying to trick you. And I think that's something that's really important to remember is that when things seem like they fit a narrative a certain way, or um, it seems like they're really pointing to something, like being able to take a step back and being like, you know, what are ways that if I were in control of this, that I could manipulate the data or I could, use it to build another narrative. That kind of, you can kind of turn it into another analyst game and keep yourself like, entertained that way. But I think also to the, Jen's point of it's, maybe it's better for your career if you're able to be the analyst who can write all the blogs about the hot new findings and things versus like, the analyst sitting in the corner who's, doing the heavy duty stuff. There's also, it's really important that there's an analyst who's out there who's like poking holes in everyone's things and like, maybe they are destroying dreams, but they're also, finding the weak points or finding like this, like Rain said earlier, like this doesn't make sense or I don't see this connection. Um, you probably won't be super popular with your like initially with your coworkers, but like that's a really important role to have because the end, like theoretically the analysis will be better that comes out.
Well, like, as long as they're not the person that's like, to play devil's advocate, don't say that phrase and maybe it'll be a little bit better.
This is why you need to know Krav Maga, so you can defend your hypothesis.
I will not get over that story anytime soon, Jen. Like, that's just,
Yeah, I really wish I could have been there. It sounded impressive, but
crazy.
I had some similar arguments, like not like fist fights, but definitely going back and forth with another group of analysts going, no, it's this, no, it's that, and it's interesting because we each had different data sources that we were looking at, And I think some of the defensiveness was coming from, okay, well, based on my data, right, this is what I'm seeing, and this, and the other side's going, well, we have this other data that seems to tell a different story. But it got a little contentious. Like, people can get very personally invested in the work that we do. And in some ways that's good, right? It means people are passionate about what we do. But you need to know where to draw that line. It's not a personal reflection if I didn't get it right this time.
Right. So if a junior analyst was listening to this episode and you could recommend one practice for them to adopt to avoid common pitfalls, what would each of you recommend?
I think MB would tell them to be the whole poker, like aspire to be the whole poker.
Not,
Maybe
I
not.
was thinking actually of
putting
what
words in
Rain
your mouth.
mentioned in the beginning when, like, which I think was also kind of an experience that I had too, where like you assume that, I hope I'm not paraphrasing this like completely incorrectly, but you assume that everyone else knows what you're doing. Um, and you don't speak up if you see something that doesn't make sense to you. Um, because I feel like the worst case scenario, if well, I guess now we know the worst case scenario is you could get beaten up by your coworkers. But like previously, like I would say the worst case scenario, if like you ask a question or like you don't understand something, like, if you're wrong, they'll explain it to you and you learn. If you're correct, like, hopefully it improves their analysis. Um, but again, I think as a junior analyst, depending on the culture that you're in, that can be a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, I can see that. I think one of the things that I would recommend that I think we struggle with as an industry is if you didn't come in with it, get some type of like formal analysis training. What I realize is we all come from different backgrounds. Like I have more of a technical background. You have some that may be poli sci. You have some that may be geopolitical. And you bring in people from wherever you can. We'll take people. If you're a plumber, come on, let's go. I'm gonna show you how to analyze these packets, and we're gonna do some analysis. And it's easy to teach the technical stuff, but the reasoning, the logic, the tradecraft, I think a lot of that comes with like true discipline and time. But there's a lot of, I think, formal training that we didn't all get. Because there's like that level set, like somebody already talked about, like MB was talking about confirmation bias. Some people may not know what that is, truly, right? You may have heard of it, but to truly know what that is and how you can combat that, right? And ACH, like how can that help if you bring in another alternative to what you're already thinking? So I think we deal with that a lot. We've seen improvements going back to the reporting where people are using like that language that's helpful. It's probably not this is, this threat group that matters in this field. So I would recommend if they didn't get it, some type of formal structured training, because I think that helps and that goes a long way and helps with your trade craft.
Yeah, I think to go along with what Rain and MB have said about, challenging conventions, speaking up when you disagree or you don't understand something, and getting that analytical training, that can be challenging. Like MB mentioned, like if the culture doesn't support it. But I think in the industry as a whole, right? It's a high pressure field. Like all technology, I think, is a high pressure field. People are often under deadlines, they're working long hours, they're being pushed to produce and so on. So it's really hard. And that can make it hard to be wrong or to look like you don't know something. And what I see constantly in our industry is this hesitancy even to ask a question. We teach boot camp for Synapse, right? And I can't tell you the number of times someone will ask a question in class, and it's usually preceded by, this is probably a dumb question, but, and it's like this knee-jerk caveat that people tend to tack onto everything because, God forbid, I admit that there's something in the vast field of technology that I don't know. So that getting comfortable with asking questions, getting comfortable with asking for help, getting comfortable with challenging an assumption or asking for an explanation if you don't have one. And hopefully you're in a culture that supports that. But whether you are or not, like the additional piece of advice I would give would be to find a mentor. If you can do that, like someone who's more senior in the field, who's willing to provide guidance, provide input, provide support. I had people who helped my career, but I don't know that I could point to someone who I would directly call a mentor. And it's something that I've often regretted. Just somebody who can help you navigate a career path generally is helpful for all of us. So if you can find that person or a group of people who can support you in your career growth, I think that that's a really positive thing to do.
Are you volunteering?
Sure. In my spare
Who's a
time. I mean,
mentor?
I think we should all help each other, right? Like it's a tough industry. Like we're all under pressure. We're all trying to learn. We're all trying to work with incomplete data. We should support one another. Like that's what we have to do and what we should be doing.
I think as a part of that, like, um, not that I've done this at all myself, but like, you know, when Silence was talking about like if you're not in that type of culture, like try to find a mentor. I think there's also we also probably also have a responsibility, like, create it for yourself and, like rope people in. And kind of like if you're not it's probably difficult. It's probably an uphill battle, but if you can create like your own little bubble of where it's okay for people to ask questions and like, put yourself out there as kind of like the sacrificial lamb of like, I'm gonna ask questions and I'm just gonna like bulldoze my way through and make it something that's more normalized. But I say this with like full awareness that this is not something I do myself, but we should all try to be better, I guess.
Do as I
I,
say,
I,
not
I,
as I do.
Mhm.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. I
I,
am fully the
I,
person who in the chats will type, this is probably a stupid question. And then like sometimes I will delete it before I send it. But like that's still, it's a hard habit to like get out of. Um,
Well, I
I
think like,
have embraced my role as the dumb person in the public Slack for Synapse. Like people ask questions about like how do I do this or how would I write this query, and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to take a shot at that, and I'll like reply with my analyst storm, and then I'll see like Busy is typing. And I'm like, okay, so now Busy is going to tell them the right way to do it. So my way worked, right? It was a decent answer, but now Busy will tell them the better way. But I'm willing to be that person, right? And hopefully, I can at least provide an answer, and I can also show that, like, okay, there's different ways to do stuff. My way may not be the best, but I'll at least take a shot at it. So
it
that's
works.
my job
It's just
now.
not elegant.
That's right. It's
right,
not elegant.
scrappy, but it still works.
That's my favorite word.
So I call it janky analyst code. Gets the job done, right? Would not base a power up on it, but it works for me.
Sometimes I'm just like, it doesn't matter how fancy you are getting there. Like,
Yeah.
Doesn't have to scale.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to work every time.
We're probably like giving the devs hives as they see like our janky analyst code, but it works.
Oh. I did want to kind of add on to that community aspect that you had mentioned, MB, because I'm a department of one at the Vertex project. I'm the lone marketer.
Oh,
So
we're going to call you that now, like
yeah,
the Lone Ranger,
yeah.
Callie the
So
Lone Marketer.
if you're listening to this podcast, I'm doing all of the background. I'm doing the editing. So if you've got a problem with it, like it's me. But as analysts, you have each other to lean on. So like if you're trying to form a community, like what advice do you have to like another analyst that also might be operating as a department of one? Because I assume that that's probably happening in certain organizations where maybe they've just got one.
I think
I
I
think
would
it just.
go with what, sorry.
No, go ahead, MB.
I was going to say I would go with what the Silence said earlier is find a mentor, like rope them in, even if they're not, like I consider both the Silence and Rain to be mentors because I learned so much from them. I don't know if they were aware that they had that role, but they do. Congratulations, whether or not you wanted it. But yeah, I think that's kind of like what, if you're a department of one, that's kind of like what your options are. Um, and I would say like, even if it's somebody that like you know of who you just like admire their work or like how they treat people or how they, like we were just at a conference that was like just a really great conference. And there were people that I saw speaking or, like don't personally know, but also like would never go up and like introduce myself because I'm like way too like shy to do that. But I was like, they seem really cool in the way that they answered questions, or like they gave kind of like the benefit of the doubt to the person who was asking, in a way that like even if the question, like sometimes like I feel like when I ask questions, it's kind of clumsy, or I don't really know enough about what I'm asking that it's like badly phrased or something. So I always really appreciate when whoever's answering kind of gives me the benefit of the doubt and kind of like morphs the question into something that's useful, and also answers what I was trying to get at. And so people who do that, especially to anyone who's brave enough to ask a question at a conference to a speaker, like, I think that's really cool. And so like, I feel like those are kind of the more remote ideas of mentors where it's like, I don't know you personally, like we've never interacted, but like I still learn from you. But I think that if you're a department of one, that's kind of what your options are. So like your potential unwilling mentors, or like unaware mentors, like, the silencer rain, or like the more remote mentors who like have never interacted with you, but like they're people that you're like, the things they do are things that I want to also be able to do. It's a very
Yeah, I
convoluted
would agree
answer.
with that. I think you start to build your community by people that you maybe admire. I think people can sometimes we can underestimate how much people want to be helpful. And so if it's someone who you don't know, right? If you just admire their research and they have a blog, I'm sure if you hit them up on LinkedIn, like people respond. Like I've done that, right? Where I'm either complimenting their work. Sometimes they don't respond, but it's not personal, right? They just don't respond. But I think you find work that you admire. You can find different communities if there are hackathons that you want to participate in, professional groups, going to conferences like MB said. I think it's a great way for you to build connections, learn who is working on the same problems as you. Even as an example, we have the Synapse community, and people talk all the time, and sometimes relationships just form organically. It's like, oh, you're using this tool for this reason, or you have this use case. So I think if you just make yourself visible and realize that there are a lot of teams of one or few, it just becomes important for you to just establish, community in any way that you can. So I do think that's a common thing, because I think back in the day, going back to the pitfalls, we did a poor job of sharing. I don't know if we were just afraid to, or we didn't realize it. It's like you're arguing over the same thing, but like your telemetry is totally different. So obviously, so you have to have community, even as a team of three. It's important for us to have community with other people. That's just the only way that you can really see everything and kind of have the knowledge that you need. So
Yeah. And I think like mentor may sound super formal. Like, it may sound weird to reach out to someone who maybe you don't know and be like, will you be my mentor? And it can be as formal or informal as you want, right? It can be, hey, can I hit you up every now and then when I have a question about my career, or when I'm struggling with something at work? It could be something that you maybe make a little bit more formal, like, hey, can we meet once a month just to talk about like whatever's going on career wise? There may be programs that are accessible to you. I know that WESIS has a mentorship program that they run every year, where you can either be a mentor or a mentee, applying to the program to get a little bit more structured advice. But just having that community and people that are trusted that you can reach out to, whether it's with an analytical question or whether it's a career question, is just super helpful, and strongly encourage people to do that.
So, the three of you, you're from what I've seen in the time that I've been at the Vertex project, you're a tight team that gets along really well, as far as I can tell. You
As
haven't
we
had a
reference
fist fight.
beating each other up.
What do you have? What advice do you have for a team that's not as cohesive, that's not fist fighting?
I'm going to say it
I mean, I
depends,
think,
because I think it
yeah.
go ahead, Envy.
No, you have a better answer. Go ahead.
How do you know I have a better? Because we're so tight, you know what I'm going to say, right? Now, I do think it depends. And if you're not a cohesive team, maybe you just need to facilitate more discussions and kind of get the team working a little bit more closely together. Maybe that's not going to solve the problem, but that's still okay. because maybe different members of the team have different strengths. And if you can find a way to work the team where everybody gets to play to their strengths, and maybe there's not as much cross-pollination or you're not super tight, it still works because everybody's making the best use of their skills. If there's actually a problem, and you have somebody or more than one person who's actually disrupting the team, or the team itself is dysfunctional, and sadly that can't happen, that may or may not be something that you can address. That's typically something you would have to escalate to your supervisor and see if that can be resolved in some way, and hopefully it can. But as always, it kind of depends on degrees, and hopefully it's something that the team can facilitate amongst itself, so that they can work better together if that's the objective. But, sometimes that's not always the case.
Yeah, I think we're really fortunate here where we have a great culture, but that culture was set. We have a pretty flat culture, organization, but like I'm going to say it started at the top, the co-founders, where they're pretty no nonsense about anything that's going to be cancerous or disrupt this culture. We're a small company, very selective on who they bring in and not afraid to say, hey, maybe we need to make some adjustments, right? If things are going to affect it. I was a part of an organization previously where, as a result of a merger or whatever it was, but no one would ever make the decision from the top. And you just saw us running around, and it's like, someone please say something. It's like this lack of committal. I think that for team cohesiveness, and if people don't icky group hug like we do, you need to have direction from someone up above. Someone has to drive it. And then you need buy-in, but you have to also display the culture that you want to see. So if it's, we're big here on like challenging each other. We do that, everyone from the co-founders to us to devs, like everyone challenges each other. And it may feel contentious, but it's really not. Like it's all love and it's healthy. So I think in addition to having someone from the top down showing and communicating what they expect, then you have to start living that life and demonstrating that on a daily basis so that it becomes, the culture, I would say.
I think the one thing that I would add that I think we've both kind of touched on before is that I think when you say cohesive, like there's so many different ways that we can interpret that. Like for us, our little group, like I feel like we are also friends, and I hope we're friends. I don't know.
Where we
Something and
find
be like,
out.
absolutely not. But like, I feel like you can have a team that's cohesive and like gets the job done and things, but has like a much stricter kind of like professional line. Like we are not friends or coworkers, and that's fine. Like if that, like if your analysis is fine, if that like functions, if the team functions well and things, like that can be qualified as cohesive, because you're doing the work. But I think, to Reen's point where it's like just dysfunction, whether it's because people from the top are not kind of like setting a culture or making decisions, or there's like no kind of like accountability for people's behavior or things like that, where like maybe there's infighting or things like that, that's not cohesive in any point. Like it's not, and it's going to impact what your analytic product is at the end of the day. Especially if there's like if you're challenging each other in a way that's not helping produce a better product, or it's not something that's like helping to identify, maybe like it's where you're just trying to like take away, where you're not like contributing to a better product or a better outcome, where you're not like helping everyone kind of like do their best work. That's not the type of challenge that we would advocate for, or quite frankly, if we did that internally here, like that would absolutely not fly. We would hear about it from, not only would like, Rain or the Silence be like, what are you doing? But we would also like hear about it from, like our co-founders, like they would not stand for it. Which I think comes back to, like setting the culture. That was also a very convoluted answer, Kelly.
No, it wasn't.
Well, thank you, Rain, The Silence, and Savage for being here today. This was a great conversation. Thank you to our listeners for being here today, and we will see you in the next episode of our limited series. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening to Signals and Stories. If you found this episode useful, be sure to follow the series and share it with your team. For more on how the Vertex project approaches intelligence, from data modeling to real investigations, visit vertex.link. We'll see you in the next episode.